I met the Mothman because I broke the only rule on my route: don't look up. At 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, my delivery app blinked the same warning it always did, and the cab smelled like hot plastic from my phone charger. Rent had jumped again, my medical deductible had reset, and the night runs paid double, which is why my hand stayed on the wheel even when my gut told me to turn around. A bridge looks harmless on a map. In real life, a long span over black water feels like a hallway with no doors, and anyone who's driven alone overnight knows how the mind starts inventing company. Red eyes lit up in my windshield, not ahead of me, but inside the glass like a reflection that didn't belong to anything in the cab. My throat tightened because the memo was still open on my dash screen, and the first line sat there like a dare. The dispatch update had come through as a corporate notice routed by an automated queue, the subject line ending in Rev 3.2, and the text looked slightly washed, out like toner that never fully fused. It said, "Keep your eyes down." It said, "If red eyes appear in reflective surfaces, do not meet them." I met them anyway because denial feels cheaper than fear until the bill comes due. The instant my gaze locked on that red, the white lane markers on the bridge didn't fade. They snapped off like someone flipped a breaker, and the only thing left guiding my tires was the vibration of the rumble strips under the asphalt. A little laugh got stuck in my chest, the kind that happens when the brain can't pick between panic and embarrassment. The cab camera clicked once, a tiny mechanical shutter sound, which made no sense because the company-installed camera had no shutter, just a little green status light that watched drivers for safety scoring. My app chirped and flashed a compliance prompt, and my own reflection stared back at me looking older than my license photo. I told myself it was fatigue, because I'd been up since the afternoon, because the depot kept cutting routes, because getting replaced by an algorithm had stopped being a joke and started being a rumor with teeth. The bridge cable lights ran in a neat line along the railing, and each one burned a steady red like aircraft markers. When my eyes drifted, the red in my windshield drifted too, but the angle stayed wrong, like the reflection belonged to a different face. A hard swallow scraped my throat. I checked my mirrors the way I always do, twice, because my dad taught me to double-check anything that could kill you. The back seat held a sealed cooler with a temperature logger, a little plastic rectangle labeled DR7 on the inventory sticker, and inside it sat a set of lab samples that had to be at the city hospital before dawn. The samples mattered, but the overtime mattered too, and that was my first lie. I told myself the run was about duty, about not letting patients wait, but a bigger part of me cared about the bonus line on my pay stub. A faint vibration started in the steering wheel, not road buzz, something rhythmic like a phone alarm hidden under fabric. My stomach dropped because the truck wasn't supposed to vibrate at idle speed, and I wasn't idling. I was rolling 35, exactly what the memo demanded, which made it worse. Overhead, a maintenance sign hung dark with its lettering unreadable from this angle, and I kept my eyes off it because the memo said not to scan signage on span B. That detail looked like a typo the first time I read it, but the corporate voice didn't do typos. Corporate did liability. The red eyes in my windshield blinked once. That blink cracked something open in my head because reflections don't blink unless something living is behind them, and nothing living belonged in my cab besides me. A second line from the dispatch note came back to me, the one that sounded like it was written by someone who'd already tried to be brave. Do not stop on the bridge. Do not activate hazard lights. Maintain lane center and continue until clearance. My right thumb hovered over my hazard button anyway, because a part of my brain still believed buttons could fix fear, and my thumb trembled like it wanted permission. The vibration under the wheel turned into a steady pulse, and the air in the cab went cool enough to raise goosebumps on my forearms, which didn't match, the heater blasting at my ankles. My eyes flicked down to the dashboard because looking down felt like obeying, and obeying felt like safety, and I needed to believe in something that simple. The app threw up another prompt, a pop-up with a cheery icon that looked like a seatbelt. The text was short, and that made it scarier. Enable safety mode. Focus on the red dot until the timer completes. Safety mode sounded like help. It sounded like a feature built by someone who cared. It was also the one rule in the memo that felt too polished, too eager, like a hand extended by someone smiling in the dark. I hit decline. The moment I did, my speedometer flickered. The needle dipped and rose like it couldn't decide what speed I deserved, and the numbers on the digital readout jumped backward by 1, then corrected, then jumped again, and my mouth went dry because instruments don't argue unless something is rewriting them. Behind me, the cooler's temperature logger beeped once, the kind of warning chirp it made when the seal wasn't tight. My left hand reached back on instinct to check the latch, and my fingertips brushed the cooler lid, cold and damp, even though I'd wiped it dry at pickup. A rational part of me tried to build a story that didn't include monsters. The bridge had old electronics, the app had bugs, my cab camera glitched, I hadn't slept. My brain wanted a sentence that ended clean. Red eyes blinked in the windshield again, closer this time, and the story my brain was building fell apart. The rumble strips changed pattern under my tires, from steady to stuttering, like the road itself was sending Morse code, and I realized I'd drifted without feeling it. The lane center assist in my steering wheel fought me, gently at first, then harder, nudging my hands back to center like another set of hands had joined, mine. A breath came out of me, sharp and ugly. "No," I said, and it sounded small in the cab. The bridge's cable lights along the rail went dark all at once. Silence didn't creep in, it arrived. The heater fan stopped, the engine note flattened, the tires went from roar to hush, and the only sound left was my own pulse knocking in my ears. The absence forced a choice, because silence on a moving bridge means something has taken control of the noise. I could keep rolling blind, or I could hit the brakes and break the rule that said never stop. My foot hovered and the red eyes in the windshield widened like they liked the hesitation. A flash of white text popped on my dash screen, and for a second my own face reflected in it looked split in half by the glow. The memo updated without my touch, and a new line appeared below the old one, the font slightly different, like a patch layered on top of a patch. Do not record span B. That one wasn't in the version I'd read before leaving the depot. My dashcam's little red recording light stayed on, which told me either it hadn't gotten the message or it was lying. A tiny habit from years of driving kicked in. I tapped the dashcam twice to save the last minute to a protected clip, because sometimes proving a thing matters more than surviving it, and the tap made a hollow plastic sound like knocking on a coffin lid. The bridge lights didn't come back, but my engine sound did, too loud, like it had been held underwater and then released. The cab filled with that familiar mechanical noise again, and relief hit me so hard my eyes stung, which is how I know relief can be a weapon. The next set of rail lights ahead lit up in a new pattern. 3 red, 1 dead, 3 red, 1 dead, like the bridge was counting down. A laugh tried to climb out of me again, and I swallowed it because laughing felt like inviting attention. The red eyes in the windshield slid downward, tracking my gaze, and I understood the cruelest part. Whatever this was, it didn't care about my truck. It cared about my attention. The far end of the bridge came into view as a darker shape against a darker sky, and my app finally stopped nagging and flashed a single word that made my muscles loosen. Cleared. My hands relaxed on the wheel, and I hated myself for it, because I could feel how obedience had been rewarded on purpose. A service plaza sat a mile off the exit, the kind with harsh lights and stale coffee, and I pulled in because I needed my body to be somewhere that wasn't suspended over water. The truck rolled to a stop beside a row of vending machines, and the ordinary hum of refrigeration units almost made me cry. My fingers shook when I hit stop on the dashcam. A little progress bar spun, and then the screen went black for a second too long. The clip list came up empty. Not deleted. Empty, like the camera had never been recording at all. I sat there staring at that blank list because the mind hates a vacuum and tries to fill it with anything, and my imagination offered up wings, claws, folklore, a creature perched on the truss with eyes like taillights. Then my training offered a different thought, colder and sharper. Maybe the monster wasn't on the bridge. Maybe the monster was the policy. I walked into the service plaza with my phone in my hand like a talisman. The air inside smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner, and the fluorescent buzz drilled straight into my tired skull. A bored clerk looked up and then away, and I envied that ability to glance and forget. In the restroom, I splashed water on my face and watched my own reflection. My pupils looked normal, my skin looked normal. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't because my reflection didn't blink wrong. The windshield had. Back in the cab, I did the thing people do when they want control. I searched my inbox for the dispatch memo because I needed to see the words again, needed to prove they existed outside my head. The memo had vanished from my sent folder too because I'd forwarded it to my personal address earlier in a half-panicked attempt to save a copy. The forwarding confirmation still sat in my notifications like a ghost receipt, but the message itself wasn't anywhere. Chain of custody had been severed without leaving fingerprints, and that frightened me more than folklore ever could. My phone vibrated with an incoming call from dispatch. The caller ID showed the company's generic number, the one that always routed through an automated attendant, and that normality made my stomach clench. A synthetic voice started, the kind used for after-hours operations, and it kept a calm tone like calm could erase reality. Route adherence deviation detected. Please confirm driver wellness. I swallowed because my throat had turned sandy. Wellness confirmed, I said, and my voice sounded like someone else's. Enable safety mode, the voice replied, smooth and patient. Focus on the red dot until the timer completes. A rule disguised as help, packaged as concern, the trap rule. My thumb hovered over the button again and my mind flashed an image of rent notices, of my deductible, of the depot manager's smile when he told drivers the company could always find someone hungrier. A tiny lie slipped out of me before I could stop it. Already did, I said, even though my screen still showed the prompt waiting. The synthetic voice paused a fraction too long, which shouldn't happen with automation, and then it said, "Thank you for confirming." The call ended. The prompt didn't vanish. My cooler beeped again, more insistently, and the temperature logger screen read 2 degrees warmer than it should. The samples had a clock, so did my job, so did my fear. I drove to the hospital dock with my eyes fixed on the road line like it could keep me safe, and that fixation turned into a mantra because the brain likes rituals when it can't trust rules. The delivery went fast, signatures on a screen, a dock worker who didn't look up, a rolling cart disappearing into sterile corridors. Back in the empty cab, the return route loaded automatically. The map highlighted Span B again, the bridge like a throat I had to go down twice. My stomach lurched. A habit from my old warehouse job surfaced, the one where I always printed a pick list even when the handheld scanner said it wasn't necessary. Paper couldn't update itself behind my back. At the depot, I parked and walked into the dispatch office, pretending I needed a new seal for my cooler. The office held a metal filing cabinet and a binder shelf, and a line of laminated safety cards hung on hooks like they were trophies. I found the driver shift binder without asking because no one watched the night drivers closely unless the numbers looked wrong. The binder's cover had a coffee ring on it, and the plastic sleeve was peeling at the corner as if someone had tried to rip it off and thought better. Inside, a tab labeled for Span B was missing, not torn, gone clean like it had never been there. My pulse picked up. I flipped through anyway because panic makes hands move while the brain stalls. A single loose page slid out, folded twice and smudged with greasy thumbprints. It looked like it had been printed, reprinted, then handled in a hurry. In the bottom corner, tiny initials sat beside a revision note, the kind of internal marker used to track who was responsible when something went wrong. The page held a short list of directives written in that corporate tone that tries to sound neutral while hiding blame. The lines weren't numbered. They didn't need to be. They were designed to be followed, not questioned. One line had a smear through the middle, ink dragged like someone wiped it with a wet sleeve. The smear erased a single word, and the remaining sentence changed shape. Do stop on the bridge if another motorist signals. Do stop. That contradicted the memo in my phone, the one that had told me not to stop. Contradictions don't happen by accident in a system that lives on compliance. My mind tried to rationalize again. Maybe two versions existed, maybe an update, maybe a mistake. But the smear looked deliberate, like damage used to create plausible deniability. I took a photo of the page with my personal phone, the way people do when they feel powerless, and the screen captured the smear, the initials, the faint gray line where a staple shadow marked where the page had been attached to something else. The depot manager came in behind me and I didn't hear him until his keyring jingled. My shoulders tightened because that small sound meant authority. Paper doesn't help, he said, not angry, almost bored. His name badge sat at his belt, flipped backward like he didn't want it read. Those spans are classified as driver focus zones. The system updates in real time. My mouth went dry. Classified by who? He shrugged like the shrug had been trained in HR meetings. Insurance, contracts, everybody. Look, keep your score clean. Focus on the dot if the app asks. The bridge isn't the problem. That last sentence landed wrong, too confident, too rehearsed. A slow fear crawled up my spine. So what is? The manager's eyes slid away from mine and his voice dropped half a register. The part that looks back when drivers start noticing patterns. He said it like he meant the app. He said it like he meant something else too. He left me alone with the binder, which felt like an instruction more than a dismissal, and I realized my job depended on my willingness to pretend contradictions were normal. My phone vibrated again. An internal message arrived, not from dispatch, but from the compliance system, routed through a folder path that looked like it belonged to HR. The text was short. Driver flagged for curiosity risk. Span B exposure exceeds threshold. Curiosity risk. My skin prickled because I'd never seen that phrase in any training. I sat in my cab afterward, watching the depot lights reflect in my windshield, and I thought about quitting. A normal person would quit. A sane person would quit. Then I thought about the apartment notice taped to my door 2 weeks earlier, the one that warned the rent increase would hit next month, and I felt the system tighten its hand around my throat. Return route started at 4:22 a.m., and my wheels rolled back toward the bridge because hunger beats fear more often than people admit. The approach road to Span B ran through a stretch of warehouses and empty lots, and my mind kept replaying the manager's sentence, the part that looks back. I tried to picture an algorithm looking back, a camera, a score, a data set, and somehow that felt more plausible than wings. At the on-ramp, a spray-painted warning covered the concrete barrier, thick black strokes sloppy with speed. Someone had written a sentence, but rain had streaked it, and one crucial word had been washed into a smear. Look at the lights, not the eyes. Or maybe it read the opposite. The streaking made it ambiguous, and ambiguity turned into a hook in my mind. A rational choice would have been to turn off. Another ramp sat a quarter mile ahead. I could have rerouted and taken the longer highway, eaten the time penalty, blamed traffic. Instead, my tires hit the bridge deck again because my brain kept chasing proof like proof could buy safety. The red rail lights burned steady. The water below stayed unseen. My app stayed quiet, and that silence felt like a trap reset. Halfway across, I saw a sedan stopped in the right lane. Hazard lights flashed amber, bright and human, and the sight punched heat into my chest. Someone stood beside the sedan's open hood, a figure in a hoodie waving one arm low, not overhead, like they didn't want attention from passing cars. The rule from my vanished memo snapped back into my mind. Do not stop. Do not activate hazards. Continue until clearance. The smeared binder page contradicted it, maybe telling drivers to stop for signals, or maybe telling them not to. Corporate had turned a life-or-death decision into a paperwork glitch. My palm slicked on the wheel. A hard, clean moral dilemma settled in my lap. Keep moving and preserve my contract, or stop and keep a stranger from getting hit. I imagined the news clip that wouldn't exist because no one cared about a broken-down car on a bridge at dawn. I imagined the quiet guilt later, the kind that arrives when the adrenaline fades. My foot eased off the gas. The cab camera clicked again, that impossible little shutter sound, and my stomach turned because it felt like a witness being summoned. A cold thought slid through me. Maybe the system wanted me to stop. Maybe the system wanted me to stay. I slowed anyway because duty isn't always noble. Sometimes duty is just refusing to leave someone alone in a dangerous place. The truck rolled behind the sedan and I hit my brakes fully, the first true rule break of the night. A spike of panic hit with it and my own voice in my head snapped, "Stupid, stupid." The app immediately lit up with a warning banner, bright red. Unauthorized stop detected. Maintain route continuity. I put on my own hazards despite the rule because a human body was standing in a lane and I couldn't stand watching rules beat blood. Outside, the air carried a faint chemical tang from the river, like algae and exhaust mixed. The figure beside the hood turned, and the face that looked up at me wasn't monstrous. It was exhausted. A woman in her 30s, maybe 40s, eyes wide, cheeks hollow with the kind of stress that comes from too many overnight shifts. She held a phone in one hand like she'd been trying to call someone, anyone. "My car died," she shouted over the wind. "Nobody's picking up." My mouth moved before my brain could dress it up. "Get in the truck," I said. "Don't stand there." Her gaze flicked past me toward the bridge rail lights. She flinched like she knew something about red. "The app tell you not to stop?" she asked, voice sharp with a familiarity that made my chest tighten. I hesitated and that tiny pause felt like confession. "Yeah." She laughed once, humorless. "Then it wanted you to keep moving, which means stopping is probably the only smart thing left." That sentence hit me like a slap because it flipped the whole logic of compliance. Following rules might be the dangerous choice. She ran to my passenger door, and the instant her hand touched the handle, the locks clicked down by themselves. The cab camera status light, usually green, turned red. My app flashed another prompt. "Passenger detected. Enable safety mode." My skin went cold. "Get in," I hissed, and I yanked the door from inside, forcing it open against the lock mechanism because old truck still had muscle in the hinges. She climbed in, panting, and as soon as her feet hit the floor mat, the red eyes appeared in my windshield again, brighter than before. Her breath caught. "Don't," she whispered, and the word held more fear than any scream could. The engine note wavered, and the steering wheel tugged toward the center line like it wanted to place us precisely where the bridge was weakest. I kept my eyes on the asphalt directly in front of the hood, because looking down was the only thing both versions of the rules agreed on, and my jaw clenched hard enough to ache. My phone pinged with a compliance message that tried to sound polite. Driver safety compromised. Focus on the dot to regain control. A red dot appeared on my screen, dead center, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. The woman beside me stared at it without moving, pupils dilating. Her voice shook. That's not a dot, that's a lure. My hand reached for my phone to shut it off because my first instinct in any crisis is to remove the shiny thing. The screen refused. It stayed on, pulsing. My mind hunted for an exit. I scanned the dashboard and noticed a small button under the steering column, the manual override for lane assist, a physical switch I'd never used because the company loved their safety features. I flipped it. The steering wheel stopped fighting me. That competence win felt tiny, but it was real, and it proved something important. The system didn't own everything. Not yet. The woman exhaled and her shoulders dropped a fraction, relief leaking out despite the danger. Good, she said. Keep it off. Whatever sees through the camera can't steer if it can't predict. Whatever sees, I repeated, and my voice sounded thin. The bridge rail lights blinked in that 3 red 1 dead rhythm again, and the pattern moved forward along the span as we drove, like a wave telling us where to look without looking. Name? I asked, because anchoring in human details keeps panic from swallowing everything. She gave me one, then immediately regretted it. Doesn't matter, she said. They don't keep names, they keep scores. The phrase lodged in my mind because it felt true in more than one way. My phone vibrated with a new message, routed through a queue name I'd never seen before. The text looked slightly misaligned, like a copy pasted over itself. Driver must return to span B for verification. Do not exit route until verified. I swallowed. That's insane. The woman stared straight ahead, eyes watering. That's the point. If someone leaves, the system loses its witness. A low creak shuddered through the bridge deck, deep enough to feel in my seat, and the cab filled with a vibration that made my teeth chatter. Bridges creak, old spans settle. My brain tried to file it under normal. Then the creak repeated, same pitch, same length, too exact to be random. Something was mimicking the bridge. I glanced at my side mirror for half a second, and the red eyes snapped toward me in the windshield, tracking the movement like a predator reading a twitch. My stomach rolled. So that's how it works, I muttered. Attention equals access. The woman nodded, jaw tight. Attention equals consent. They call it focus training. Her phone buzzed in her lap and she flinched. My app did this too. The first time I complied, the dot turned into a face. A small, harsh line of self-talk cut through me. Don't be the guy who proves the monster by obeying it. We reached the far end of the bridge, and when my tires hit solid ground, relief punched through me again, sharp and immediate, because leaving the span felt like leaving a trap. The red eyes in the windshield didn't vanish. They just dimmed. My app flashed cleared again, and for one bright second, the thought arrived that the worst part might be over. The woman let out a breath that shook. We made it, she said, and her voice carried a fragile hope that made me want to protect it. My phone rang immediately after, the same corporate number. The synthetic voice sounded pleased. Verification incomplete. Driver must complete safety mode focus test. The woman stared at my screen and her face went pale. Don't. The voice continued, smooth as a contract. Failure to comply will result in termination and liability assignment. Liability assignment. The words hit harder than termination because termination meant losing income. Liability meant losing everything. I felt a sick pull in my chest because my biggest fear wasn't the red eyes. My biggest fear was getting blamed for whatever the bridge was about to do. The woman leaned closer, voice urgent. They want a scapegoat. They want a human to make eye contact so the report can say driver distraction. My mind flashed to the binder page with the smear, the missing tab, the manager's calm shrug. Corporate had been laying tracks for this. A responsible choice would have been to hang up, to drive away, to call actual emergency services, to refuse the test. A desperate choice felt easier. I needed my job. I needed rent. I needed my deductible paid. I needed to believe the system couldn't crush me if I gave it what it wanted. My thumb hit safety mode. A red dot bloomed on my screen, brighter than before, pulsing in a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat too perfectly. The timer ring began to close around it, slow and hypnotic. The woman grabbed my wrist, nails biting. Look away. I can't, I whispered, and the admission tasted like shame. The dot sharpened into an eye. Not a metaphor, not imagination. The circle became a pupil, and the pupil widened, and my cab filled with the sense that something had pressed its face against the glass of my phone. My breathing turned shallow. This is a trick, I said, and even as I said it, the thought collapsed under the weight of what I was seeing. A sound rose behind my ears, delicate and specific, like pages turning in a quiet office, one after another, a soft flip-flip-flip that didn't belong in a moving truck. The woman froze, eyes wide. That's the binder, she whispered. That's them making a new version. The page-turning sound kept going until the timer ring hit halfway. Then my passenger seat felt empty. I jerked my gaze sideways despite every instinct, and the seatbelt lay buckled, tight across nothing, like someone had been there and then removed cleanly. My skin went numb. No, I said louder and my voice cracked. My phone screen returned to a harmless dot, the timer ring nearly complete. The synthetic voice spoke again through the speaker, calm as ever. Verification logged. My stomach dropped because it had logged something that wasn't true. I slammed the phone face down on the dash. The timer kept ticking anyway, bright light bleeding around the edges, and the cab camera status light stayed red. A thought hit me like a punch. The system didn't need me to look at the bridge. It needed me to look at the story it was writing. I pulled into a gas station off the highway and parked under bright lights, because humans still trust light even when they shouldn't. I got out and walked around the truck, palms sweating, scanning for any sign of my passenger. Her sedan wasn't on the road behind me. No hazard flashes in the distance, no headlights, nothing. A clerk inside the station stared at me like I was strange, and I realized I was breathing too fast, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. I forced myself to look normal because looking normal keeps cops away, and cops meant paperwork, and paperwork meant liability, and my mind had learned to fear liability more than monsters. Back in the cab, I opened my route history. The app showed no stop on span B. Not even a slowdown. My heart pounded. The evidence of my pro-social choice had been erased, which meant the system could make it disappear, which meant it could make it mine. A small, ugly thought surfaced. Maybe helping her had never happened. Then my seatbelt hung buckled across nothing, and the red status light on the camera kept burning, and I knew reality had been altered in a way that left physical residue. I did the only thing I could think of. I started collecting proof like a forensic tech because competence feels like prayer when fear gets loud. I photographed the buckled belt. I recorded my screen showing the missing stop, I snapped the route map, highlighting span B again and again, no matter how many times I tried to reroute. Each time I saved something, the file name changed by itself, adding characters that looked like internal tagging, and the folder path shifted, sliding into directories I didn't recognize. A theory formed in the back of my mind, and it made me cold all over. This wasn't a creature haunting a bridge. This was a system that could rewrite records, and the bridge was just the stage. The manager's sentence came back. The part that looks back when drivers start noticing patterns. I drove back to the depot with my hands locked at 10 and 2 because my body needed ritual. Inside, the office lights felt too bright, and the air smelled of printer toner and stale pizza, the scent of people who worked late enough to stop noticing. The manager wasn't there. A different supervisor sat at the desk, scrolling through a tablet. He glanced up and smiled like a customer service rep. "Long night?" he asked. "Somebody broke down on the bridge," I said, testing the words out loud. His smile didn't change. "No incidents reported on span B." "I stopped," I said, and my voice shook. "I picked up a driver." The supervisor tilted his head like he was listening to a child describe a dream. "No passengers detected," he said, and he tapped his tablet. Route continuity remained intact. Anger flared in my chest, hot and clean. My seatbelt is buckled across nothing. His eyes flicked just once toward the cab camera feed on his tablet. "Safety mode recorded verification," he said gently, which made the anger twist into nausea. "Verification means the driver is fit to continue." Fit to continue, fit to be used. A new email arrived on my phone, and I didn't even need to open it to know it was official because the font loaded with that corporate sameness. The subject line referenced a form number and a compliance category, and the timestamp showed it had been sent while I was still on the bridge. The body text was short and polished, and the wording carried that HR doublespeak that tries to turn harm into process. It said, "Driver acknowledged focus prompt. Driver accepted liability waiver for span B exposure." I hadn't accepted anything. The waiver line ended with a digital signature field, and next to it sat my name, typed correctly, no typos, no hesitation. My hands started shaking, slow at first, then worse. A physical vulnerability beat hit hard because the body doesn't care about theories. The body knows danger. A sharp, mean thought cut through me again. Stupid, so stupid. The supervisor watched me with a patient expression that belonged in a training video. "Take the rest of the route," he said. "Then go home. The system will calm down if the driver stops resisting." Resisting, like my fear was a tantrum, like my evidence was attitude. My throat tightened. What happens if the bridge fails? He shrugged, and that shrug felt like the whole story. "Bridges fail," he said. "Drivers fail too." The sentence hung in the fluorescent air, and the horror clicked into place with it. This wasn't supernatural first. This was institutional decay wearing a myth like a mask. The Mothman wasn't a creature on the truss. The Mothman was a name the system used to keep people from staring at the cracks. I walked out before my anger could turn into something reckless. In the cab, I sat with my phone in my lap and stared at the evidence I'd collected, because the urge to warn someone grew louder than the fear of getting fired. I couldn't call the transportation department directly without leaving a trace. I couldn't go to the news without risking an NDA lawsuit. I couldn't pretend nothing happened and sleep at night. A choice landed in me, heavy and final: leak the proof or keep my score clean and let the next driver become the scapegoat. Duty beat fear this time because my lie about why I worked the night runs had curdled into something else. The truth was simpler. Someone had already been erased from my passenger seat, and letting that happen again felt like murder with paperwork. I uploaded everything to a private cloud account under a name that wasn't mine because anonymity is the last tool poor people get. I attached the photos, the screen recordings, the vanished memo receipts, the buckled belt image that proved the system could steal a person and leave a strap behind. The upload finished. Then the folder disappeared from my phone. Not deleted, moved. My storage app refreshed and showed a new directory I didn't recognize, nested under a corporate path with a clearance code I'd never had. The evidence didn't vanish. It relocated. My breath came short. "So it wants the proof," I murmured, and my voice sounded hollow. A quiet decision formed. The leak needed a physical anchor, too. Digital proof could be swallowed by the system. Paper could be lost, but paper could also be found. I printed the waiver email at the depot printer when nobody watched, because old habits die hard, and the printer spit it out with a faint smear across the top where the toner didn't set. The smear distorted one line enough to look like a typo, and that felt like the system's fingerprints. I folded the page and slid it behind the span B tab space in the binder, the spot where the missing section should have been, like planting a seed in contaminated soil. Then I did something I never do. I went back to the bridge. The return trip started just after sunrise, sky turning gray-blue, and normal people filled the road with commuter urgency. The span ahead looked ordinary now, which made it worse because ordinary hides rot. My app stayed quiet until my tires touched the bridge deck. A message popped immediately, routed through the same HR folder path. The font on this one looked slightly misaligned, and the text carried a hint of impatience. Driver must remain in lane center. Do not signal. Do not exit vehicle if alarms cease. The rule sounded like safety, which meant it wasn't. 2 lanes ahead, a maintenance gate stood open on the shoulder, orange cones laid out in a neat line. A worker in a reflective vest waved traffic through with a bored gesture, normal, almost comforting. Then I noticed the worker had no face. Not missing, not blank. The face was turned away at the exact angle that prevented eye contact, like a mannequin trained in compliance. My skin went cold. "No," I whispered, and the sound came out like air leaking. A plan clicked into place, fast and desperate. If the system needed witnesses, then I needed to steal its audience. I needed to stop traffic before the bridge could claim them. My hazards flashed on, bright amber, and my app screamed a warning banner across my screen. "Severe violation, termination pending." Termination felt small compared to what I was about to do. I eased my truck across lanes, slow and controlled, blocking the span behind me. Horns blared, drivers shouted. A man in a pickup leaned out his window, angry, and his anger looked beautifully alive. I waved him down and pointed toward the open maintenance gate, because people follow gestures when confusion hits. "Off the bridge," I mouthed, and I hated that I couldn't use more than my hands in urgency. A few drivers obeyed, swerving toward the shoulder. Some didn't. Some slammed brakes. Chaos spread in a wave, human and messy. My app pinged again with that cheerful seatbelt icon. Enable safety mode. Focus on the red dot to regain control. The red dot appeared, pulsing, and behind it, faintly, the shape of an eye tried to form. I forced my gaze down to the dashboard, then to the road line, then to the tires of the car nearest me because I couldn't let my attention become consent again. A heavy vibration rolled through the bridge deck deeper than before. Concrete dust puffed up from a seam in the asphalt, a thin gray breath escaping the structure. Drivers noticed. Panic shifted from anger to fear, and fear made them listen. The maintenance gate worker, faceless, raised one arm and pointed straight at me like selecting a culprit. My cab camera clicked. The steering wheel jerked hard to the left, trying to yank me back into lane center, back into the path the system wanted. My arms strained, muscles burning, and I muttered through clenched teeth, "Close the lane. Close it now," because repeating commands keeps the brain from dissolving. I reached under the steering column and flipped the lane assist to override again, praying the physical switch still mattered. The wheel loosened. Another competence win, bought with sweat and fear. Behind me, more cars peeled off the bridge toward the shoulder, guided by the chaos I'd created. A woman in an SUV rolled down her window and shouted something I couldn't hear, but her eyes met mine for a split second, human recognition passing between strangers, and it felt like salvation. A loud crack snapped through the span, sharp enough to sting the ears, and the bridge rail lights blinked red in that 3-1 pattern like a heartbeat failing. A section of asphalt ahead dipped half an inch. Half an inch doesn't sound like much until the road stops being flat. Someone screamed. Someone hit their horn and held it, a long blare that turned into a single note of terror. The faceless worker stepped backward into the open maintenance gate and vanished behind the barrier like it had never existed. My app banner changed text in the blink of an eye, and the cheerfulness drained out of it. Liability assignment in progress. A sentence formed in my mind, cold and clean. The system doesn't kill people, it assigns blame. I grabbed my personal phone and hit record, aiming it at the bridge deck seam where dust kept puffing, because proof needed to exist outside their folders. My hand shook so badly the frame wobbled, and I hated that the evidence would look like panic, but panic was honest. The red eyes appeared in my windshield again, brighter than ever, and this time they didn't look like a creature perched anywhere. They looked like two perfect reflections inside my own glass, positioned exactly where my cab camera would catch them. A theory I didn't want snapped into place. The eyes were the compliance system's marker, the visual cue used to prove distraction on footage, a built-in exhibit. My stomach twisted. "It's staged," I whispered. "All of it." A massive groan rolled through the bridge, low and ancient. Cars behind me finally stopped fighting and started fleeing, pouring toward the shoulder exit in a messy stream. I held the line with my truck until the last car cleared the span behind me, because that was the only constructive thing left to do. I broke every rule that kept the system fed, and in return the system tightened its grip on me. My engine cut out. Not sputtered, not failed, cut clean like a remote kill switch. Silence hit again, total and wrong. The horn stopped, the wind stopped. Even the distant traffic noise from the highway faded, leaving a vacuum around my cab. The absence forced the next decision: stay in the dead truck and become the scapegoat, or abandon the cab and run on foot across a failing bridge. My phone screen lit up on its own with a final message, routed through the HR folder path, and the font on this one looked too perfect, too centered, like it had been written by something that didn't need fingers. Remain seated until cleared. I laughed once, sharp and ugly, because the rule had finally exposed its real purpose. I kicked the door open and climbed out. The bridge deck felt alive under my boots, vibrating with stress. Dust rose from seams, metal railings hummed faintly, my mouth tasted like grit, and my breath came fast because fear doesn't care about pride. On the shoulder, near the maintenance gate that had vanished, a narrow walkway ran along the edge, meant for workers, not drivers. A chain hung across it, and the chain's lock lay open, fresh scratches on the metal like someone had cut it in a hurry. I didn't question the gift. I ran onto the walkway, one hand on the railing, eyes down, because looking out at the water felt like inviting the red eyes to appear again in reflection. Behind me, the truck cab window glowed with a pulsing red dot on my phone screen, still running safety mode without me. A sharp crack split the air and the bridge deck behind my truck sagged, a visible dip that turned into a slow collapse like a mouth opening. Cars that had been trapped ahead surged forward, tires squealing, and a man sprinted along the shoulder waving his arms at others. Humans saving humans, messy, loud, real. The bridge failed anyway. A section of deck dropped with a roar that shook my bones, and dust erupted in a gray cloud. My truck lurched, half its weight shifting toward the gap, and for a second the cab hung suspended like it didn't want to choose between falling and staying. The red eyes in the windshield stayed fixed, staring out at the world like a camera recording blame. My phone vibrated in my pocket and I almost dropped it. A new notification arrived from my cloud account. Not a deletion notice. A share notification. The evidence folder had been shared with an internal address I didn't recognize, a department name I'd never heard of, and the clearance code in the path matched the one that had swallowed my upload earlier. Shared universe, different case, same teeth. My chest tightened, not just from dust, but from the realization that the system moved faster than any leak. I stumbled off the walkway onto solid ground on the far side, lungs burning, and I kept moving until my legs stopped shaking. Only then did I look back. The span behind me lay broken, twisted, and the red rail lights along the fallen section kept blinking their pattern, steady as a heartbeat that refused to admit death. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, human and chaotic, and for the first time all night the sound made me feel less alone. My phone buzzed with a message from the company. No anger, no apology, just process. Driver distraction incident recorded, liability assigned. I sat on the curb beside my truck's cooling unit, dust on my jeans, hands trembling, and I felt a clean, flat horror settle in me because the system had gotten what it wanted. A collapse, a culprit, a story that blamed attention. So I did the last responsible thing I could do. I printed my recordings at a public library kiosk 2 towns over because my home printer was tied to my account, and I slid copies into every driver. Binder I could find at the depot during shift change, plain paper mixed into official pages like a virus. The system deleted my uploads, but it couldn't delete 100 hands-turning pages. Later that day, I found the same clearance code stamped inside a different binder, one that belonged to a facility across the state, and the phrase under it made my stomach drop. The rule wasn't about the bridge. Unless the rules were never about safety. Anyone who has seen that symbol before should not ignore it, because my phone still asks for eye contact, and the last line on the screen always reads, "Keep your eyes down."